Hey, Guoba here. Numby is finally out on Star Rail and he's brought his wonderful friend Topaz along for the ride. Together, they make a self-sufficient DPS capable of doing great single target damage on and outside of their turns. Not only that, they can also boost the damage of any ally follow-ups and use those ally follow-ups to wreak even more havoc. In this guide, I'll be explaining everything you need to know about their kit, as well as what the best build is to do the most damage on Topaz. I'll also be reviewing her pros and cons, Eidolons damage increase, and Light Cone's calculated power to see if she's worth your extra jades. If you like this video or learned something, like and maybe consider subbing for more of my guides. And let me know below if you're pulling and what teams you'll be running with her. Anyway, let's begin. Topaz is a 5-star fire unit that follows the hunt path, and is our first unit of this combo. The hunt path are dedicated to single target damage, as well as abusing speed and action advances to take turns frequently. Topaz will be doing so by having Numby on the field with her, who will be boosted by her abilities, take turns by himself, and also take more turns the more follow-ups you have hitting enemies. Her whole kit is essential to her damage and her potential team's damage, so level her skill up and her talent, followed by her ultimate, and basics won't be mattering even if you go fully skill point positive, but you can level them up if you want extra damage. Numby is the main part of her damage though. At level 80, she has a low base HP of 931, but a nice base attack of 620. She has a base defense of 412, but her speed is the third highest at 110. A glass cannon like the rest of the hunt units. Her energy cost is 130, above average, but we'll see how we can deal with that in the rotation section. Finally, as a hunt unit, she has the lowest chance of being hit among paths. So let's check out her awesome kit. Let's first check out her talent Trotter Market, and remember to not sell trotters, they deserve basic trotter rights. Numby will have his own turn in the action order, and has a base speed of 80, equaling an AV of 125. When he does take his turn, he will do damage to the enemy afflicted with Proof of Debt, her skills debuff, and do 60 toughness damage, but won't regenerate energy in these normal follow-ups. He is pretty slow on his own, but this talent enables him to cut large chunks of his turns out and take action sooner. You do this by hitting the enemy with Proof of Debt with follow-up attacks, advancing him forward by 50% for each one. This is a flat value, so he will always get the same value unless his turn has under half of its duration left. This means 2 follow-up attacks will make him act instantly. He won't activate himself though obviously, and when Topaz falls he runs away. If Topaz does get crowd controlled though, Numby will still act since he's a strong and independent piggy. Deficit is her basic attack and will actually count as a follow-up attack thanks to her A2 passive, meaning she can advance forward Numby with it. It won't do much outside of that though, including damage, and will do 30 toughness damage, regen 20 energy, as well as a skill point. Her skill difficulty paying is next. She will first inflict a target with the Proof of Debt status. This is vulnerability debuff for follow-up attacks, so any follow-up attack on this unit will have its damage increased by the same percentage, until you include other vulnerability debuffs. At level 10 that means any follow-up damage hitting that enemy is multiplied by 1.5 times, which is a very high boost. It will also throw Numby onto the enemy, reproducing his talent's effect and counting as a follow-up. This is why it has the same final animation as his talent. This will do 60 toughness damage, regen 30 energy, as well as consume a skill point. The Proof of Debt debuff can only be on one enemy at a time, and there is a visual indicator above them signaling it. Furthermore, if no enemies have this debuff when an ally starts their turn or takes action, so say with an ultimate ability, it will automatically be applied to a random enemy. This is very good and means this debuff will be up permanently, albeit potentially on the wrong target. This means you might need to use her skill to redirect Numby onto a boss, but otherwise she can be fully skill point positive and not lose out in any way outside of the skill's small extra damage and the energy. Her ultimate, Turn of Profit, has a cost of 130 energy and enhances Numby into his Windfall Bonanza state, increasing his damage multiplier and his crit damage percent for 2 attacks. Furthermore, he will get a 50% action advancement on any type of attack now on the enemy with Proof of Debt. This means you can instantly advance him forward on an ally's skill and ultimate, or from one Topaz basic or skill alone, since they are registered as both a basic or skill as well as a follow-up. This also means you can now advance him outside of your turns with ally ultimates, which was only possible with things like an out-of-turn follow-up from Clara for example. For its maximum value, you'll want to activate it after Numby takes a turn, since he doesn't regen energy anyway, and so you get the highest amount of action advance possible. If you activate it right before he acts, it means you've wasted a potential whole extra turn of Numby. After activating it, you have 2 options, basic or skill. Using skill means you will consume one of the stacks instantly, since it repeats Numby's follow-up, even if he's enhanced, and then Numby will take his turn with the advance forward. This means you'll have 2 back-to-back enhanced follow-ups for a high burst turn. Using basic means skill point positivity, That means after Numby takes his first enhanced action immediately, your allies will contribute to the second one very easily. There's not much difference. Finally, you can let Numby take action from an ally boosting him forward, and then let Topaz act for 2 back-to-back enhanced actions on top of his next follow-up being advanced for a total of 3 Numby attacks in one swift move. Since the skill will still advance him forward by 100% and then consume that attack, it means even if he won't get an enhanced attack for the third one, he will still be advanced by 100%. Finally, her technique is explicit subsidy. Numby will always follow Topaz around in the overworld, which is the cutest thing ever. Numby will also hunt down chests and fellow trotters so you can murder them and make sure he is the last trotter alive in the world. Finally, using her technique has benefits in combat. You'll get energy after Numby's first attack, you'll get some credits after beating overworld enemies as well, though it takes a while to max out the 10k daily cap. And then you'll get cosmic fragments and maybe a random curio after every simulated universe fight after using the technique. This might be what power creep really means. Now for traces which are 100% needed for her full potential. Her first essential passive grants her basic the attribute of a follow-up attack, meaning her basics will advance Numby or do 1 million damage with the Elation Path. Her second passive gives all of her attacks a 15% damage buff when attacking fire weak enemies. Great little bonus, but you won't always be facing fire weak when she's a sub DPS. Her final one is needed for her rotation and will make Numby's Windfall Bonanza attacks grant 10 energy each, meaning a total of 25 energy granted back after using the ultimate. Since Numby doesn't regen energy normally, this is very substantial. Her traces grant her 22.4% fire damage, perfect, and 12% crit rate. She gets the 2 best possible DPS traces. Finally, she gets 10% HP, which honestly saves her low base stats from being one-shot. Let's quickly review her Eidolons now. They make her a lot better. Credits to Grimmer, who I worked on calculations with his very cool spreadsheet. We also worked together for Relics and Lycones. Her first will make enemies with Proof of Death gain a new debuff when taking follow-up damage, applying before said attack. It will increase any follow-up crit damage by 25% up to 2 stacks. This means any Topaz attacks or ally follow-ups can get a 50% crit damage boost when hitting the Proof of Death enemy, making the single target damage amp of Topaz even stronger. For Topaz herself, it's a 10 to 17% DPS increase, considering she will always be hitting the Proof of Death enemy. But the 17% assumes 0 ramp up. For any follow-up allies, it's also a nice DPS increase. Her second is big for her rotation, dropping a whole turn. All it does is make Numby regen 5 energy whenever he attacks, which is what all follow-ups do anyway, unless they are summons like Lightning Lord and Numby. This means more enhanced Numbys and overall more action advances, and is a 12% DPS increase. Her E3 and E5 grant 6 and 7% DPS increases respectively due to their talent scaling. Her E4 is massive despite its small text. Every Numby turn will now push Topaz's action by 20%, granting her what equals to be a permanent 1.25 times speed boost when only considering 1 Numby per Topaz turn. If you get more, Topaz goes even faster. More turns means more Numbys too, which means they are even more self-sufficient. It's a 27% DPS increase at max potential in a solo Topaz calculation, but that's hard to truly gauge and some people find much less. Her final one grants Numby an extra Windfall attack and 10% fire resistance penetration on his Windfall attacks, but not his regular ones. An extra Windfall is massive for damage though, also granting an extra 10 energy in the rotation, and the res pen on top means lots more damage. At this Eidolon, she becomes a real hyper carry and can probably get a 100% enhanced Numby uptime if considering just her own turns. A final 27% DPS increase. Now for Relics, you'll want to not go 4-piece Firesmith, it's pretty weak and will not even be worth the farm, even 4-piece Musketeer comes out ahead. You want to use 2-piece Fire, 2-piece Musketeer or 2 Hacker as her main set, and pray one day that a better set comes out. Musketeer 4-piece also works and they're all very similar in strength. She doesn't have tons of self-stat buffs and doesn't have attack percent traces, so Quantum Set will only be better versus Quantum Weak, so no more Quantum Set beating everything. For ornaments, you will of course want to farm in South Soto, but if you don't want to, Spacing Station isn't far behind. Rutilant doesn't make much sense on her though, but the buffs are okay. For main stats, you want a crit chest, attack percent or speed boots, fire damage percent orbs, and attack percent rope. Attack percent boots can be used very well with Asta, or with just a good amount of speed subs. NG rope does not do anything for her since her normal rotation is pretty easy to obtain, and only enables weird rotations that have weaker overall damage. For an ideal stat goal, you want 2.5k attack, an 80 to 160 crit ratio, and 121 or 134 speed, but the speed isn't always necessary. 161 speed Topaz is only good with attack boots and an Asta, or else you'll do 0 damage. For Lycones, her best options are her Signature, Stellar Sea, and Swordplay. Her A signature gives crit rate and more follow-up damage, and no, it's not that great on Yanqing. Then, after you hit an enemy with a follow-up attack, not before, unlike her E1, they will receive the Tame debuff up to 2 stacks, which will grant all allies 24% crit damage to attacks against said target, unlike the E1 which is only 4 follow-ups. It's great for her personal damage, being 5% better than her next option, but that's when considering the next option at its complete maximum power, which is unreliable. Furthermore, it boosts ally damage, so gives her a harmony type role like her E1. This is also solo calculations, meaning in a setup with a follow-up main DPS they also get more damage, which this comparison cannot show. Also remember, this will scale further the more Eidolons you get. Stellar C is just an excellent stat stick and completely free to play. Swordplay can stack fully on every Numby attack since he performs 7 to 8 hits per attack. It will reset changing targets though, and this comparison assumes it's always on one target, which won't happen throughout a fight. The other limiteds don't work with her kit very well and are weak. Silence Remains is another okay 4-star and the rest are whatever, apart from maybe one being Return to Darkness. Now, Return to Darkness makes her damage drop a lot, so don't run this if you want her to do damage. But if for some reason you want a supportive Topaz, and you don't have a Pala or a Watcher in the team, and you need to remove strong enemy buffs, well, you can plop this on Topaz on the team, meaning she now has damage amp, damage, and enemy buff removal in one unit. The damage is going to be cope, but with 7 hits of Numby, you have a 93% chance to dispel a buff at S5, which is not bad for a DPS. For her rotation, you can go for a 5 basic fully skill point positive rotation, only needing a kill or hit in 5 turns. You can also opt to use one skill which can be necessary to redirect Numby for a guaranteed 5-turn rotation. Remember, her damage won't increase that much from using a skill. You'll get a 1-turn fast ultimate and a bit more damage from the skill, but it's Numby's turns that do the most damage. If you want a 4-turn rotation, you do 2 skills, 2 basics, and still require a kill or a hit, which is fine, and now you'll be skill point neutral rather than positive. Both playstyles are legit and just depend on what you want your Topaz to do for the team. So now we know everything about her, let's review her pros and cons before finishing with her synergies and teams. Her pros are her single target damage. You may end up thinking she doesn't do much, but she does a lot just in separate attacks, which stack up to be a bunch of damage. Remember though, she's not designed to be a hyper carry. This high single target damage combines with the fact that she complements follow-up DPS. A lot of them are AoE, and so her high single target damage means their lack of single target damage is negligible now. This finally combines with her Proof of Debt debuff, not only increasing her own single target damage that helps the AoE DPS, but also increasing their damage on that target by a ton. A Genuine Lightning Lord doing 1.5 times its normal damage versus one enemy is a pretty scary sight. She can also be skill point neutral or skill point positive very easily, and this barely reduces her damage, since it's all in the Numby attacks, which happen regardless of basic or skill use. Also, her Lightcone and E1 make her even more supportive for your teams. We also have future scaling. She will be a possible best in slot for any future follow-up DPS team. That isn't a guarantee though, but if you're already pulling her in 1.4, it's a bonus if it comes out to be true. Finally, we have out of turn damage. Numby attacks a whole lot and means Topaz doesn't even need to take a turn. This is good for finishing off waves of enemies without lifting a finger. For cons, we have her lack of AoE damage, kind of. Of course, hunts aren't known for their AoE, but we have lots of waves with tons of enemies, and more so when Argenti comes out since he's erudition. Though this is actually fine since you can run an AoE main DPS, and also fine since Numby attacks so much and out of turn. We also have the action advances of Numby being a bit annoying. You can't really min-max him, and he can lose action advance value depending on when he's advanced. This means you won't always get 50% action advance, and the damage he does will vary to actual sheets. A con is the focus of hitting the Proof of Debt target. If you play Clara and she counters every unit except the Proof of Debt one, it's a real sad sight. Luckily her AoE ones mitigate this, but single target follow-up units will have to hit the Proof of Debt enemy. Finally, I'd say she's a luxury pull. She fulfills a role that isn't needed right now, unlike Kafka that helped dots truly shine, but that's also because she was the first 5-star dot unit, I guess. Follow-up units, even if some may not be the best, aren't really suffering. Maybe in the future she'll be needed to make a unit truly powerful though. And maybe when content gets harder, her role will be much more desirable. Now onto Synergies, and one of her best, if not her best, is going to be Asta. You have the fire damage % bonuses with her Traces and Planetary Rendezvous. You have a high attack % boost. You have a massive speed boost, which translates to more Numby attacks and the use of attack % boots. And you have the dual buffing power for 2 DPS teams. Asta benefits Topaz and her teams very, very well. If you want to try the 161 speed Topaz, you can go for a 2-turn skill spam master with cogs, NG rope and E4, and Numby will act much better in line with Topaz, since Topaz will have exactly a bit under half of his AV. Another is Ting Yun. The high attack increase is lovely, and having every Numby attack doing a little more damage is great too. And we'll also get more enhanced Numby attacks thanks to Ting Yun's ultimate. In dual DPS teams as well, Ting Yun can buff the main carry, or Topaz, or a mix of both depending on your priorities. Bronya, for once, isn't all that amazing, since Numby won't be getting those high buffs unless you have her E6, and you won't gain that much value from the extra turn and action advance, since Numby will already be close by. Using Bronya with her is still possible, she's still Bronya, but it's way more worth to use her on a different DPS team. For sustain, Fushwan would be my ideal pick, since the crit rate and potential crit damage buffs can benefit dual DPS setups very well, which is what you'll usually be doing with Topaz. And Topaz's low base stats make one-shots possible without Fushwan. For follow DPS, we will go through one by one quickly and note how effective Topaz could be, as well as what team you'd run. You have to remember that Topaz brings potential skill point positivity, high damage, and damage amp. A harmony only brings damage amp. Even if the amp is higher than Topaz's, the extra damage from the main carry can end up being less than Topaz's overall damage. You have to count the whole team's damage when comparing. So Clara follow-ups every time she gets attacked, or when any ally gets attacked during her ultimate. Her single target hits are annoying for Numby, but with high ultimate uptime that is irrelevant. Topaz is a great DPS for Clara, being part of Clara's best team. Ideally, you'd run Ting Yun with the two. Urta does a follow-up whenever an enemy goes under half HP. This is massive since it's AoE and frequent. The only problem is if Numby triggers this, the Urta follow-up will not advance him forward. So it can be rough, but together they make a lot of fun follow-ups happen. Kafka follow-ups once a turn after an ally basic attacks. Since it will focus the enemy you basic attacked, this means you can activate it on the proof of dead enemy, even with Topaz. Though this won't actually mean much if Numby is already close in action value, so you'd want to make Numby act first and then get Kafka to follow up. So Topaz is technically an option for hypercarry Kafka teams. March counters 2 to 3 times per turn when shielded allies receive enemy damage. This is good only if she hits the proof of dead enemy, so it's more like 1 per turn. And you need team-wide shields or high aggro on herself or on Clara for example. She also needs to solo sustain, as the damage gained from extra Numbys is not worth dropping a Ting Yun in a Clara team, so you'll need a high investment March. Yanqing has RNG single target follow-ups and performs better with Harmony units than a Topaz from what I can tell. E4 Bronya has follow-ups, but it requires wind weakness and is not that effective, but hey, maybe an E4 Bronya Kafka comp one day. Xingshui E4 has follow-ups every turn potentially, and can work with Topaz theoretically, but Topaz will be having to spam basics like Appella would, and you're losing Appella or a secondary Harmony. Jingyuan has an AoE follow-up that desperately wants more single target damage, so they're actually a nice pairing. People, including myself, might have thought that removing a Ting Yun or Asta is detrimental to his damage, but when you consider Topaz's own damage and the 1.5 damage multiplier, or Lightning Lord, you get a lot of damage. Remember, it's not about how many follow-ups you necessarily get and how many times Numby can attack with those follow-ups. It's about that on top of the rest of the stuff she can provide. In practice, the two worked well together and are not as cope as I thought. Blade has AoE follow-ups when being hit or consuming HP 5 times, so it will take a while for him to follow up. He does however have a limited amount of support, so if you're lacking Jingliu, Silverwolf and or Bronya, maybe you can use the two together. A fun idea is to run a triple DPS comp with Jingliu, Blade, Topaz for tons of follow-ups, but I don't know how effective that is. Finally, you have Himiko, who does AoE follow-ups very frequently in practice, but requires Fire Weak ideally. Since Topaz and Himiko are both fire, you wouldn't really be able to bring them into another weakness for someone else to break unless you run them with Silver Wolf. This combos with Asta though for a trio of pure power that obliterates all Fire Weak content. Finally, if you're just going to run Topaz by herself in a hypercarry comp, I recommend Ting Yun and Asta as her two supports, or maybe Silver Wolf in the place of Ting Yun. It does work, but it wasn't the highest clear speed for me. So let me know how your pulls went in the comments and I will see you next time. Thanks to all my amazing members, thanks for watching and have a Guoba day.